we go. Um, okay, so what I want us to do is we're just simply going to jump into our discussion of Henry IV. And in order to give you a context of that, or to remind you of a context of that, I just want us to look at this little chart. Oops, forgot to share. Just look at this little chart, which is Batman. I want us all to meditate upon Batman. I saw part of the Zack Snyder Justice League last night, and I liked it because I'm crazy about DC anyway, so I'm not a good person to discuss that. But what we want to do today is we want to look at the way that Hotspur, who is here in red, continues his fall all the way to his death, his tragedy. We want to see how Falstaff falls, and it looks like it's going to end in a tragedy, but at a certain turning point, it ends happily for him. And we want to see how continues his rise to fulfill the role of the Prince of Wales in a way that Hotspur cannot or will not fulfill that role, and how ends happily. So let's remember that pattern as we are discussing the play. We are in Act 4, Scene 1. And we have Hotspur and Douglas discussing upcoming battle plans as part of their revolt against the king. And notice what Douglas says of Hotspur, which is relevant on line 10. We're in Act 4, Scene 1, line 10. Line 10. Douglas says, "Thou art the king." Actually doesn't say that. He says, "Thou art the king of honor." So Hotspur is not qualified to be the king. He's not qualified to be the Prince of Wales. He doesn't want to be the king, but he is the king of honor. And Shakespeare may be suggesting that the age of honor, the age of Hotspur, of chivalry, is passing away, and we're passing into a new Renaissance era as the medieval codes are passing away with Hotspur. We're entering into a new Renaissance era of Machiavellianism, represented by most of the leaders in the play, including Henry IV, Worcester, Northumberland, and maybe Hal, depending upon your interpretation of his character. So while they're in this camp, they hear the news that Northumberland is not coming and he's not bringing his troops. Well, that is a major blow to the whole rebellion, because remember, they're supposed to have all 8 heads of armies there for them to have a chance. Right now, they only have 3. They only have Hotspur, Worcester, and Douglas. But they need the Archbishop of York. They need Northumberland especially. They need Owen Glendower and the Welsh. And those people, who else? There's another one. Those people, Mortimer. Those people are not there. And when they hear that Northumberland isn't coming, they very naturally say to themselves, "Oh crap, this is horrible." Hotspur says on this, again, we're in Act 4, Scene 1, line 28. "Sick now, droop now, the sickness doth infect the very lifeblood of our enterprise. 'Tis catching hither even to our camp." What is he saying? It's like the bubonic plague. His sickness is going to make all of us sick. All of us die. Worcester says on line 42, "Your father's sickness is a maim to us." Hotspur responds, "A perilous gash, a very limb lopped off. So they're saying we're doomed, we're screwed without Northumberland and his troops. Now, as it turns out, in the next play, we find out Northumberland wasn't sick, he was pretending to be sick because he didn't want to go fight because he thought they'd lose. So here is a Machiavellian abandoning the life of his son and his brother because he himself very Machiavellianly figures out that he probably can't win this fight. Okay, so Hotspur at this point is facing reality, and that's what we need leaders to do. We need leaders to face reality, even if it's grim. But notice immediately afterwards, Hotspur goes back to the way he really is, ignoring reality or coloring it to make it much better than it is. He says on line 75, talking about Worcester, talking about how horrible this is, he says, "You strain too far. I rather of his absence makes this use. It lends a luster and more great opinion, a larger dare to our great enterprise." He says at the end of that passage on line 83, "Yet all goes well, yet all our joints are whole." Originally, he said it's like our limbs, like an arm being torn off and us bleeding out. He says, no, we're fine. Everything's fine. No problems. In fact, it's better because the fewer of us there are when we win, the greater proportion of honor that we get. Well, by that standard, Hotspur, why do you not attack all of the king's forces by yourself in pajamas with a pimento? Just attack them while holding a pimento. Why not, Hotspur? It doesn't make sense. It's irrational. But that's what Hotspur does. He cannot take bad news, and that's one of his failings. We've already seen how he can turn friends into enemies. Another problem with his leadership is he cannot take bad news. Okay, so here's another example of him not taking bad news. Vernon has returned to parley. Now, have we talked about parley yet in this class? What happens in a medieval battle, or really a lot of battles, ancient battles as well, is each side will line up to fight, and they will send representatives to go talk to each other. This happened in Braveheart. Remember? He said, "I come to pick a fight," and so on. What you do is you're trying to do a last-minute negotiation to keep from fighting, to see if you can meet the other side's objectives through political means rather than military ones, right? Through negotiation, through concession. So they send out Hotspur, and he talks with a guy by the name of Sir Walter Blunt. Have we talked about what a foil is in Shakespeare yet? A foil, F-O-I-L. Write down the word F-O-I-L, foil. In medieval or in Renaissance terms, if you look at a gem in a ring, what they would do to set that gem off is they would put foil, tinfoil behind it. And so because the foil was behind it, it would set off the particular glory of that gem. Green if it's an emerald, blue if it's a sapphire, and so on. Well, sapphire blue anyway, whatever. And so a foil in Shakespeare is one character who sets off another character's qualities through comparison and contrast. So they're two similar characters, and they're there side by side for us to see the strengths and the weaknesses, the pros and the cons between them. So Sir Walter Blunt is so in some ways, Hal and Hotspur are foils to one another. Who should be the Prince of Wales, right? Well, Sir Walter Blunt is a foil to Falstaff. I don't know Glow. Oh, I remember the old series back in the 80s, but I haven't seen the new series of Glow. But a foil is there as a contrast. So Sir Walter Blunt is similar to Falstaff in that he is a knight. He's similar to Falstaff in that he is old, probably shouldn't be on the battlefield. But he's different than Falstaff is that he's a man of honor who dies in the battlefield. Falstaff is an old knight who's a coward, right? So Sir Walter Blunt comes out to talk to Hotspur mano a mano, and he says, what are your terms? Now, normally you have a list of demands where you say, we'll go to war, to battle here today, unless you do this and this and this. Hotspur comes out and he goes, did you know that we helped put the king on the throne and he hasn't been very grateful? And did you know one time he told my Uncle Wooster he had to leave the room and he was badass? That man is so mad. And did you know he told me I couldn't even talk about Mortimer? And furthermore, he wouldn't ransom Mortimer, even though Mortimer's out now and he's like part of this revolt, but he wouldn't ransom Mortimer. And that makes us so mad. And Sir Walter Blunt is looking at him and he's like, what are the hell are you doing? How can we meet these demands? These are just complaints. There's no way we can turn back time and meet these demands. What are your actual demands? And Hotspur's like, whoa, I'm not very good at this. What I'll do is I'll send my uncle and our friend Vernon, and they can come out and do the thinky stuff. And so he leaves, and they send in Wooster and Vernon, and that's a fatal mistake. As the leader of this revolt, Hotspur ought to be able to negotiate. He can't. And what Vernon and Wooster are going to do, Wooster is going to go out, hear the king's terms. They're going to go twice over to the king's camp. And in the king's camp, they're going to spy and see how the troops are doing and what the morale is and how well armored they are and how many of them there are. And they realize they're badly outnumbered. They're going to lose this fight. But also they go over and twice Vernon takes a look to see how Hal is doing as a warrior. And he's going to come back and report to Hotspur how Hal is doing. And that matters because he's one of the major people on the side that they're fighting. But what's going to happen ultimately is the king is going to say, okay, here are my terms. My terms are extremely gracious. Go home, you're all forgiven. That's amazing. He says, you're going to lose this fight. You're all going to die. So go home. You're forgiven. Now, Wooster is such a Machiavellian that he thinks to himself, okay, the king will forgive Hotspur. The king will forgive, the Earl of Douglas. But the king knows that I am a Machiavellian who stirred my nephew up to this revolt. So the king will say he'll forgive everyone else, but he won't forgive me. And one day he's going to have troops attack my castle, or he's going to assassinate me or something. So if I lie to Hotspur about the king's terms, I can force us to do battle. And even though we don't have any chance at all of surviving, it's still a better chance of me personally surviving. So what he's saying is, I don't care if my nephew dies and a lot of other people die, if it gives me just 1% chance of living more than I would have. So Wooster comes back and lies to Hotspur and says, the king's terms are horrible and harsh. And Hotspur looks over to the messenger in the distance and goes, get out of here. We reject your terms. And you've got to imagine the messenger's like, what? Because Wooster is a Machiavellian and he's going to betray Hotspur for his own chance of survival. That's what happens when you can't negotiate for yourself, right? That's part of why Hotspur is going to fall and is not qualified to be Prince of Wales. But on one of the trips over, Vernon sees Hal, and he's surprised because Hal is supposed to be this drunken playboy, drinking beer and so on. And on line 103, again, we are in Act 4, Scene 1, line 103, Vernon says this, and Vernon is one of the rebels, right? He's a good spy for the rebels, and he's reporting to Hotspur, the rebel. I saw young Hetty with his beaver on, his cushions on his thighs, gallantly armed, rise from the ground like feathered Mercury, and vaulted with such ease into a seat as if an angel dropped down from the clouds to turn and win a fiery Pegasus. So what is he saying? He's saying, listen, Hal isn't a wuss. Hal is a great warrior. It takes immense practice wearing your armor and immense horsemanship to be in full battle armor and leap on the back of your horse from behind. In fact, of all my readings of medieval things, I only know of one person in the Middle Ages who could do that. There may be more, but I only know of one, and that was William the Conqueror. So Hal is an amazing warrior, and nobody knew it. So this is valuable battlefield information. And Hotspur can't handle bad news. He says, no more, no more. This makes me sick. I don't want to hear it. You need to hear it. I used to, even though I'm an old fat guy now, I used to actually do sword fighting. I think I mentioned this. Did I mention this last time? I used to do sword fighting, fencing. And one thing I learned is you can overestimate your opponent and win, but you can't underestimate your opponent and win. You will almost certainly lose. Hotspur is underestimating Hal, and he has the intelligence from his own side. Act 4, Scene 2. Now we see the fall of Falstaff. Falstaff has been given a commission to go out and to recruit 150 foot soldiers. Now, he should be, as a knight, on horseback and leading, knights on horses in the battle. But Hal seems to be trying to limit the damage that Falstaff can do on the battlefield, because as a knight, he's entitled to lead troops into battle. And so Hal only lets him command foot soldiers. And that is funny because Falstaff doesn't like walking. He wants to be on a horseback because he's a big fat tub of lard. But also because it really limits what Falstaff can do insofar as damage on the battlefield. So his job, he doesn't have very much time. He just has a few hours to go out and recruit people. And he has been given money to go out and recruit them. And that money is to buy their equipment, their swords or shields or whatever, and to give them a little bit of money for food and provisions. And what he should do is go to, say, upper middle class houses, knock on the door and say, I recruit you. Because if you go to very, very lower class people, they're not in good physical shape, if they're sick or if they're in prison or something. And he does that. He goes to upper middle class houses, knocks on the door and say, I recruit you. Now, they had a law in the Renaissance that you had the right to try to give money to your recruiter, and he would release you from being drafted. And then he would have more money with which he could recruit better soldiers or pay for more provisions and armor. Does that make sense? So let's say Falstaff has 8 hours to recruit troops. He spends 7.5 hours going to place to place and saying, I recruit you. And they say, no, here's money, taking the money. I recruit you. No, taking the money. And with like half an hour to go, he has a lot of money. He has 300 pounds, which is huge amounts of money. But he has no soldiers because he's run out of time. So what he does, he goes over to the prison and he looks at the prison yard. He says, all y'all are released and you're my soldiers. And he goes to the hospital and he makes all the sick people come out and they're his soldiers. And he keeps the money because he says, instead of me paying for you to have your equipment as you march along, just take clothing off of women's laundry on the clotheslines. So you got to imagine, like, one of the soldiers has his lung hanging out of his mouth because he's dying of some disease and he's in a woman's dress. Hal rides up and says, okay, Falstaff, here's your troops. I want you. Who are these people? and how shocked how horrible they are. And Falstaff says, well, they'll do what soldiers are supposed to do. They'll die in battle. The problem is, as Patton says, soldiers aren't supposed to die in battle. As Patton says, they're supposed to kill the other son of a bitch and make him die in battle. So what Falstaff is doing is treason, because he is profiting off of having horrible soldiers that won't do the king any good in battle. And then we find during the battle, he orders his men to run into the middle of the worst part of the fighting, and they all die a hideous and agonizing death, except for a handful of them who survive, but they don't have arms or legs. Really simply, this is called murder. And one critic has suggested that Falstaff does this so he can report them as having lived, so he can get their commission, their pensions. So Falstaff has run away and is hiding on the battlefield, on the edge of the battlefield, and all of his men are dead. And that is the worst moment for Falstaff. Why? Because, you know, the people that went to see Shakespeare's plays, the groundlings who were standing with their chest up against the stage, they were the people who might get recruited in such battles. They may not think it's funny that as a military commander, he extorted money out of the system, you know, and then he caused all the people to die under his command. It's horrible. So that is what the comedy of Falstaff will lead to. And he says, well, they'll do what soldiers are supposed to do. They'll die. Again, that's treason. Act 4. Pardon me. Let's jump to Act 5, Scene 1. So this is the battle. Everyone is getting ready for the battle, and they have one last chance of parley. And Hal turns to the rebel leaders, Vernon and Wooster. In Act 5, Scene 1, line 85, gives a challenge to Hotspur. Now, you remember that Hal had convinced his father to let him come on this battle and to give him command of some of the army, because he had said, I vow to God, I will challenge Hotspur one-on-one. If he kills me, you win. If I kill him, you win. Remember that? Well, here Hal, in front of both sets, the rebels and the royals, he does in fact challenge Hotspur mano a mano. This is Act 5, Scene 1, line 85. Tell your nephew, the Prince of Wales doth join with all the world in praise of Henry Percy. By my hopes, this present enterprise set off his head. I do not think a braver gentleman, more active valiant, more valiant young, more daring or more bold is now alive to grace this latter age with noble deeds. For my part, I may speak it to my shame, I have a truant been to chivalry, and so I hear he doth account me too. Yet this before my father's majesty, I am content that he shall take the odds of his great name and estimation, and will, to save the blood on either side, try fortune with him in a single fight. So he says, Hotspur, you're the greatest knight in all the world. Tell him I know that. Tell him that I have not really done a very good job being a good knight. I truant, I have been to chivalry. I haven't really done the things I'm supposed to do, and I know he knows that. He doesn't respect me. But I challenge him here in front of my father's presence. I challenge him mano a mano to a duel to the death. Just him and me. So Hal fulfills what he said he would do in front of his father. Now, how does Hotspur respond to that? He doesn't believe it. He thinks it's stupid. He says, I wish that were true. I'd kick his ass. He doesn't even believe it. No, I'm not going to do it. He's nothing to me. He's nothing. And Vernon goes on and on. In Act 5, Scene 2, starting on line 51, Vernon goes, listen, if this guy survives the battle today, he is going to be a great king. We've completely misjudged him. He's smart. He's politically astute. He's a great battlefield commander. He's a great warrior. Watch out for him. What is Hotspur's response? Line 68. Cousin, I think thou art enamored of his follies. What does he say? You got a bromance going on with him, Vernon. Why don't you date him? Right? He's ignoring what Vernon is saying. He can't take bad news. And he completely disregards the challenge to one-on-one fight. Okay, well, let's jump back a little bit. At the end of that scene, and again, we're in Act 5, Scene 1. We're at the end of that scene. Everyone walks away. The royalists walk away. The rebels walk away. And the last two on the stage are Hal and Falstaff. And Falstaff wants one last chance for Hal to have sympathy with him. And he goes up and he says, now these are two battlefield commanders, right? And he goes up and he says on line 125, I would to a bedtime, Hal, and all well. I wish the battle was over and when I was still alive. And he seems to be wanting sympathy from Hal, as if Hal's going to say, well, I don't want you to get hurt, big boy, so I'm going to consign you to the rear and have a squad of soldiers protecting you. No, Hal's not going to do that. Falstaff is a military commander. He's a knight. So what does Hal say to him? Line 126. Why, you owe God a death. We all got to die sometime, fat boy. And that has been the battle cry of military commanders going all the way back to ancient Rome. Do you want to live forever? I mean, we're soldiers. People die. Get over it. So Falstaff seems to want some kind of privilege from Hal, and Hal is looking cold and distant at him as a superior commander might an inferior one. Hal walks off. And then we get Falstaff's speech on honor. Hal says, why thou owest God a death. We're on line 126. Why thou owest God a death. Falstaff, 'tis not due yet. I would be loath to pay death before his day. What need I be so forward with him that calls not on me? In other words, I'm not going to talk death to take me any time earlier than he should. Well, 'tis no matter. Honor pricks me on. Yea, but how if honor prick me off when I come on? How then can honor set to a leg? So if you have a broken leg, can honor come over and fix it? No. A broken arm? No. Can honor take away the grief of a wound? No. Honor hath no skill in surgery then? No. What is honor? A word. What is in that word honor? What is honor? Air. A trim reckoning. Who has honor? He that died last Wednesday. So what happens is when someone dies, it goes, he was a man of honor. Well, Falstaff says, does it do him any good? So let's imagine honor is a medal that you put on your chest. you're dead, they come along, they drop a medal on top of your corpse, and they go, "You're a man of honor. You're a woman of honor." Does it do you any good? Can you take that and buy a cup of coffee now? Oh, now you're dead. Does the dead person feel that honor? No. Does he hear it? No. So it can't be sensed to someone who's dead? That's right. It can't. But will it not live with the living? No. Why? Detraction will not suffer it. So there are people who everyone thought were people of impeccable honor, perfect character. But someone came along and said they were people of dishonor, and they were destroyed. Whether they were people of honor or not, who knows? Now, there are people who are horrible, that, like Weinstein, who got away with for years looking like people of honor, but they weren't. Let me tell you a little story. Once upon a time, there was a person that everyone thought was pure as the driven snow, perfectly moral. There were jokes about how pure this person was. This person happened to be possibly the greatest selling musician in the history of the world at the time. And his name was Michael Jackson. And he was a Jehovah's Witness, and everyone knew that he was perfectly pure in every way. Then he was accused of doing naughty things with children. Now we know he was guilty because he was tried and convicted and he was thrown in jail. Oh no, he was never brought to a criminal trial. He was just accused. And because he was accused by more than one person, 2 or 3, I think, he could not sell a CD to save his soul. His last few songs, no one bought anything. And everyone made jokes of how horrible and evil he was. Was he evil? I don't know.
My mom bought every new thing that he came out with. He was getting money from my mom. Didn't need to worry about anybody.
Well, here's the problem. If you look at the sales of his last CDs after he was accused, he basically sold nothing. But the second he died, his sales jumped up infinitely. So if your mom was one of the 10 people that bought the CD when his reputation was in shatters, okay. But no one else did. Now, I don't know if he did bad things or not. I don't know. I mean, I've read things, I've read other things. I don't know. I wasn't there. It never went to legal trial. So theoretically, he's innocent until proven guilty, right? I don't know. But either way, he lost. Well, let's put it this way. Falstaff is confusing 2 different terms, and he's doing it on purpose. One term is honor. Honor is if you honestly obey a good moral code or a code of ethics. So if Michael Jackson never did a bad thing to a small child, when he died, he was a man of honor. The other term is reputation. Now, he lost his reputation, what other people think of him. And he may have lost his honor. He may have done horrible things, but they're separate things. One is what you honestly do and you know that you do, and the other is what people think you do. So Falstaff has no honor. And so he's making fun of honor. He's saying, what's the point of honor? Honor is useless. But the real question that he wants is reputation. So what we're going to find out is he has no honor, but he's going to try to get a good reputation by lying. You see the difference between those, honor and reputation? Does that make sense? His fan base are called moonwalkers. Okay. I have to say, I never liked Michael Jackson, his music, just not because of what happened later. I just happened to never like him. He and I were born the same year. And so was Prince. And I am not famous or wealthy, but I've outlived both of them. So I don't know if that's good or bad. Now Madonna and I are competing because she was born that same year. Okay. So he has made fun of honor. He says, if you have honor, someone can come along and just take it from you and make accusations against you. So he's right, but only if you think about it in terms of reputation. Okay. So let's skip over to Act 5, Scene 2. Hotspur is saying a last-minute harangue before he goes into battle. He's talking to the troops. Line 81. Oh, gentlemen, the time of life is short. To spend that shortness basically would be too long if life did ride upon a dial's point, still ending at the arrival of an hour. What is he saying? I'm about honor. I'll do anything for honor. So Hotspur believes in actual honor, not just reputation. And if we live, we live to tread on kings. If die, brave death when princes die with us. So he's still going out, this great hero. But even in that scene, some people come up with messages saying, you've got to read these. These are important. He goes, I don't have time for that now. I got to give this speech. So he is awesome. You can't take your eyes off of him, but he's doomed. Okay. Now, what's happening is they're out on the battlefield and Hotspur and Douglas are kind of in a difficult situation because they're badly outnumbered. They're partially surrounded. They're going to lose. But they have one way of winning. If in chess you capture the king or you kill the king, you win. So they're the two best fighters on the battlefield. If they can concentrate their attack on the king or on Hal or both, and they kill them, they win the battle, or they capture them, they win the battle. So all they have to do is see the king, and the king is dressed up with his coat of arms on so that everyone knows who he is. All they have to do is see the king, rush the king, capture the king, and it doesn't matter that they're outnumbered. Here's the problem. Henry IV is so Machiavellian, so smart, so crafty. He has talked a number of noblemen into dressing up just like him. So Hotspur and Douglas are like, there's the king. Oh no, there's the king. Oh no, there's the king. There's the king. And they can't concentrate their forces. They can't just go after the king. So Douglas says, I'm going to kill every one of those people that are dressed up like a king. Now, that is not honorable. It is not chivalry. It's not something an honorable king should do, but it is something a Machiavellian king would do, and it's smart, right? So Douglas is going around killing everyone dressed up like the king, and so is Hotspur, and Douglas happens to come across Sir Walter Blunt, who's dressed up like the king. He killed Sir Walter Blunt. That's how Sir Walter Blunt dies honorably, fighting one of the best fighters on the battlefield, even though he's an older knight. So Falstaff has led his troops into battle. Actually, not led them, just told them to go into battle, and they all died, and he ran away. And he's wandering around, and he bumps into the body of Sir Walter Blunt. And this is a moment where their foilness comes together, because here the two are on the same part of the battlefield, and Falstaff is commenting on Sir Walter Blunt. And we're in Act 5, Scene 3, line 30. Falstaff says, Though I could escape shot free at London, I fear this shot here. What he's talking about is shot meaning bar bill. He doesn't want to pay his bar bill in London, but he doesn't want to get shot here. Here's no scoring upon but upon the page. Soft. Who are you? So he bumps into this corpse on the ground and he looks at it and he goes, Sir Walter Blunt, there's honor for you. Now, what does he mean? Remember earlier he said, the only way you get honor is if you die, and then they'll come and throw a medal on you and say, there's honor for you, but it's darkly ironic because you're dead and it does you no good. So here he's found Sir Walter Blunt, and he ironically and viciously says, there's honor for you. But of course, we as a viewer know that Sir Walter Blunt really was a man of honor. And so Falstaff is saying something that is ironically, doubly ironically true, and he doesn't understand that. So he says, there's honor for you. Here's no vanity. I'm as hot as molten lead and heavy too. God keep lead out of me. I need no more weight than mine own bowels. And then he says, I led my men into battle where they all died a hideous and agonizing death. Hal comes up, and Hal has been in the middle of a fight, and his sword has been knocked out of his hand. And so he's been pushed out of the battle, and he's running around trying to find another sword. So he runs up to Falstaff, and he goes, hey, Falstaff, give me your sword. And Falstaff wants to use this opportunity to act like he's in the Boar's Head Tavern doing his little skits again. He goes, did I mention to you that I killed Hotspur? Yeah, let me tell you how I did it. I was standing, and Hal goes, no, Hotspur's still alive. Give me your sword. And Falstaff goes, well, if Hotspur's alive, I can't give you my sword. I might need it. But I'll give you my pistol. And in the Renaissance, not in the Middle Ages when this happened, in the Renaissance, pistols were huge, and they were in these huge leather cases. And he says, here, there's a pistol on my side, take it. So Hal reaches in this big leather case to get the pistol, and instead of a pistol, he pulls out a big bottle of whiskey. It's called Sack. We say Jack Daniels, right? He pulls out whiskey. And as he's reaching for it, Falstaff does a pun, and he says, there's that will sack a city. And Hal pulls it out and looks at it because Falstaff earlier that day when he was arming for battle had a pistol, throws it in the mud, puts whiskey in there instead. So on the battlefield, he can get loaded, right? That's the man of honor there. And Hal says, is this a time to jest and dally now? Meaning, we're in the middle of battlefield. A good men are dying. You're supposed to be a knight. What are you doing? What are you doing? And so Falstaff turns and he says on line 55, 56, I like not such grinning honor as Sir Walter hath. So he goes, I don't want to be a man of honor like that, meaning dead. We're now in Act 5, Scene 3. Pardon me, Act 5, Scene 4. What happens is, remember when I said that Douglas and Hotspur were going around on the battlefield trying to kill all the people dressed up like King Henry IV? Well, at one point, the Earl of Douglas, who is a great fighter, actually comes upon the real King Henry IV. Now, Henry IV used to be a great fighter, but he's an older man now, and he's not as good a fighter. So Douglas is fighting who he thinks might be the king, but he's not sure. And he wounds him in such a way, as you've got to imagine, he knocks the sword out of his hand, and maybe the king is down on one knee looking up, and Douglas will automatically kill Henry IV. There's nothing Henry IV can do. And as the sword's coming down, you've got to imagine out of nowhere, someone leaps in and blocks it with his shield, and it's Hal. Hal has just saved his father's life. And he knocks back Douglas, and he goes, it's you and me now, bring it. Douglas sees that there's Henry IV, there's Hal, maybe others, so he retreats. And Henry IV looks at Hal and he says, you saved my life. And Hal's like, yeah, Dad, I did. Now, you go that way, I'll go this way because these parts of the battle need help. And Falstaff goes, Henry IV goes, wait, you saved my life. He goes, yeah, I did, Dad. And he goes, you realize you could have got a promotion. If you hadn't saved my life, you would be the king. So you saved my life. And Hal is like, yeah, you understand that you're my dad and I'm your son. And, like there's human relationship here. It's not all Machiavellianism, Dad. You get that, right? Because Henry IV, being such a Machiavellian, assumed that Hal was every bit the Machiavellian that he was, and that he would want his dad to die so he could be the king. And he's shocked in his son, but admires his son. And so he says, okay, I'll go this way, you go that way. So Hal turns around, and there on the battlefield, all alone with Hal, is Hotspur. And you got to imagine it's the Old West, and there's two guys, wah, 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 standing in the street in front of the saloon, high noon. And they even say things like old Westerns. This town's too big for the both of us. One of us has got to go down. And notice what Hal says. He says on line 60. Oh, by the way, Hotspur says, this is Act 5, Scene 4, line 58. Hotspur says, if I mistake not, thou art Harry Monmouth. Meaning, you're dressed up like the Prince of Wales. You might really be the Prince of Wales. Hal says, thou speakest as if I would deny my name. Henry IV has people dressed up like him, but Hal doesn't. And Hal's like, I'm not trying to hide. I'm Hal. Let's go. Hotspur says, my name is Harry Percy. I'm Hotspur. Time for you to wet yourself by the mere power of me mentioning my name. Hal says, why then I see a very valiant rebel of the name. I am the Prince of Wales. And by implication, he's saying, and you're not. I'm the Prince of Wales. You're not. Let's go, you and I. Let's fight. Hotspur says, line 68, would to God thy name in arms were now as great as mine. So Hotspur is saying, look, I'm rated number 1. You're not even in the top 20. So when I beat you, I'm not going to get any voting points because everyone would assume that I would beat a loser like you. Notice what Hal says. He says something to make Hotspur angry. Another thing I learned while I was back in my sword fighting days, my fencing days, is if you can make your opponent angry just before you fight, you have a better chance of winning because they get irrational and they make very predictable, aggressive moves. So Hal says something to make Hotspur angry. He says, I'll make it greater ere I part from thee, and all the budding honors on my crest, I'll crop to make a garland for my head. What is he saying? Everything you've ever done, all the glories you've ever won, every medal you've ever been awarded, when I beat you, I get all of those, and you will, in history, be nothing. You're nothing. And that's what Hotspur seems to have been fearing this whole time. He has done everything to be the honorary Prince of Wales. Hal has done nothing. It's not right that Hal should win. But that's how life happens sometimes. So they fight. Hotspur says, I can no longer brook thy vanities. I'm not going to put up with your crap. They fight. And as they're fighting, Falstaff runs up. And he's the only other one in that area of the battlefield, or he thinks so. And he's watching them fight. And he's going, go, 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 Hal, go, like a cheerleader. And he bumps into another fighter that's come up, and it's the Earl of Douglas. Hotspur and the Earl of Douglas have the best reputation on the field. Falstaff turns around and realizes if he fights this guy, he dies. So instead of fighting the guy, he lays down, pretends he has a heart attack or something, and just falls over. You got to imagine the Earl of Douglas is like, what? And wanders off. You can imagine someone faking their deaths. So Hal defeats Hotspur. Hotspur gets his last speech. Notice what he says. Again, this is Act 5, Scene 4, the line about 78. Oh, Harry, thou hast robbed me of my youth. I better brook the loss of brittle life than those proud titles thou hast won of me. They wound my thoughts more than thy sword my flesh. What is he saying? I don't mind dying, but I don't like the fact that in killing me, you got all the glory and the honor I ever had, and you took it away from me. In a way, Falstaff and Hotspur have the same definition of honor. It's just a badge that someone gives you or takes away. But Hotspur dies, and Hal shows he has a different idea of honor, that it can't be taken away. Hal thinks that he's alone on the battlefield in soliloquy, and he says, if someone were here watching, I wouldn't do this. But I'm going to give you due honors. You're the greatest knight in the world, even though you're dead. You're still better than me because of all the things you've accomplished. And you got to imagine he crosses his arms and he puts something over his face and he gives him due honor. But then he turns and he sees Falstaff laying on the ground right next to Hotspur. We might expect him to say, what, old friend? But he doesn't say friend. The reason is, at some level, he and Falstaff were never friends because they never had the same values. And Falstaff has no morality. So he turns and he says, what, old acquaintance? I hung out a lot. This is on line 101. Could not all this flesh keep in a little life? Poor Jack, for farewell. I could have better spared a better man. Oh, I should have a heavy miss of thee if I were much in love with vanity. Remember in the barroom scene in Act 2, Scene 4, he had said, I will. I do banish all worldliness, and I will banish you. And so he says, if I were still in love with drinking and partying and vanity, it would hurt that you're gone. But I've given all that up. And it doesn't really hurt that you're gone. He says, emboweled will thy see thee. They'll come and rip out his guts as part of the burial process. Until then, and bled by noble Percy lies. So he walks off. Falstaff jumps up like a jack-in-the-box, like he always does. He was faking it. And now he looks around, no one's seeing. He's going to pretend Hotspur jumped up. The two of them fought, and he killed Hotspur. And I've said that Falstaff's stock has fallen, but this is the moment it jumps back up because he's going to try to take credit for killing Hotspur when Hal just did it. He gives him a wound in the thigh and says they jumped up and he killed Hotspur. Hal comes back and he's bringing his brother because he wants to say, hey, look, if we kill Hotspur, if we kill Douglas, we've won the battle today, and I've done that. I've killed half of them, and we're almost done. So he comes back to show him Hotspur's body, and there's Falstaff. And Prince John says, didn't you tell me this guy was dead? And they go, are you for real? And Falstaff says, I killed Hotspur. And I expect a promotion. I either expect to be an earl or a duke because I did this. Right? Now, what is the reaction of Prince John? He doesn't believe this crap. He said, this is the strangest story that I ever heard. He doesn't believe it. He just thinks that Falstaff's a coward. But notice what Hal does. Hal does something really interesting. If Hotspur had killed the king and Douglas had tried to take credit, God help Douglas, because I think Hotspur would kill Douglas because it's all about getting the reputation, right? Getting the recognition. Hal has killed Hotspur, which is an amazing feat. But Falstaff is trying to take the credit. How does Hal respond? He says, and this is line 151, this is Act 5, Scene 4, line 151, For my part, if a lie may do thee grace, I'll gild it with the happiest terms I have. What does that mean? If you want to lie and say you killed Hotspur, have fun with it. Maybe you'll get something out of it. I won't stand in your way. In fact, I'll see what I can do to help. So Hal is extremely magnanimous in not needing the reputation that he killed Hotspur. And he's pretty magnanimous to his old acquaintance that Falstaff gets something out of this. Now, Falstaff has an exiting speech. This is line 156. And as is often the case in a Shakespeare play, the person who's a little bit of a villain, the self-outcast, self-exile, always has a chance for redemption. And so this is soliloquy, and Falstaff seems to mean it. And this is what he says. I'll follow, as they say, for reward. He that rewards me, God will reward him. If I do great, I'll grow less, for I'll purge and leave sacking of cleanly as a nobleman should do. What is he saying? If they promote me to Earl or Duke, as I've demanded they do for killing Hotspur, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to quit drinking alcohol, and I'm going to live righteously as an upper-class person should do. We all know Falstaff isn't going to do that, and he doesn't do it in the next play or the next play or the next play. We need him to be that kind of comic villain, like a Dr. Evil figure, right? And that's what he will do. But still, he leaves on a comic note that there could be a happy ending for him. I think it's very interesting that on the stage, you have these two figures. Both of them are battlefield warriors. One is Hotspur, one is Falstaff. And in this moment, they become foils. Hotspur is everything good and noble of the old medieval system. Falstaff is a corrupt Renaissance knight who is a braggart soldier, a miles gloriosus, who is a liar and a cheat. And which one triumphs? Falstaff triumphs, and he physically carries Hotspur off the stage as if Hotspur is himself a badge of honor. And that's darkly ironical that he triumphs over Hotspur here. Perhaps that is the Renaissance triumph of Machiavellianism over medieval notions of honor. Act 5, Scene 5. The king is on his throne, and he's saying, I command that Wooster and Vernon be executed because they lied about my terms to Hotspur. We wouldn't have had a battle. If they had told the truth, they deserved to die. So they're escorted off the stage. And then Hal, who is the right hand of his father now, is the Prince of Wales. He says, can I decide what happens to the Scotsman, the Earl of Douglas? And Henry IV says, you deserve it, man. You saved my life. So he says, I release Douglas without ransom, completely free. He's an honorable man, even if he's on the other side, and I want to recognize his honorableness. Now, Henry IV has just made more enemies because by killing Wooster, by capturing on the battlefield, in the next play, he's going to have to fight Wooster's brother, Northumberland, and Northumberland has no ability to surrender because when Wooster was captured, he was killed. So he's hardened the heart of another enemy, Northumberland. But Hal is turning enemies into friends. He releases the Earl of Douglas, the Scot, and 2 plays from now, when Hal becomes Henry V, if ever you take my Shakespeare class, you'll read Henry V. That's what we're doing in the next hour. The Scots all join Henry V. They're allied with him. They're loyal to him. And I wonder if in part they're loyal because Hal treated this Scotsman honorably, turning enemies into friends as he does. And then the king has the 4 last lines. And remember, in a Shakespeare tragedy and a Shakespeare history play, the person who speaks last is the person of highest political authority. So the highest political authority is Henry IV. So he gets to speak last. And often a king or an emperor will speak in heroic couplets. Do you remember you guys early in the semester did heroic couplets? And that's partly why I did it, is Chaucer writes in heroic couplets, and then noblemen speak in heroic couplets. Line 41. Rebellion in this land shall lose his sway, meeting the check of such another day. What does that mean? Well, he's saying in one day we've eliminated half of the rebels. We have another day like this and we can eliminate the other half, then we win because we've eliminated all of the rebels. The last two lines. And since this business so fair is done, let us not leave till all our own be won. So he's saying what happened today turned out really fair. What does he mean by fair? I think what he means is it turned out well for him and the royals. But fair also has another meaning, and that is just, right. And did the day turn out fair, just for everyone? No. Is Henry IV fair? No. Was Henry IV fair to Mortimer? No. Was Henry IV fair to Hotspur? No. Is Henry IV fair? No. But the reader knows that standing next to Henry IV, the man who will be king, Henry V, is not only fair, but will be perhaps the greatest king in the history of England, Henry V. Hal is coming as the High King. And that ends the play, Henry IV, Part 1.